Okay, everybody, we'll call to order this special meeting of council at 2:05 p.m. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelet First Nations, of whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Number 3, notice of video recording. Council would like to advise the District of Ucluelet staff, audience members, and delegates that this council meeting proceeding is being video recorded and that the recording will be live streamed or subsequently published on the District of Ucluelet's YouTube channel. Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay, none heard. Looking for an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Any input from the public today? Anyone? Okay, none heard. Reports. 7.1, overview of municipal budgeting. Ms. Monteith.
So, Mayor, Council, thank you. I'd just like to start by introducing things for us, and this is the initiation of our 2020 budgeting process. So, Ms. Monteith, our CFO, is going to start with an overview of municipal budgeting, similar to what we've done in past years. And then I'm going to cover a section on strategic plan and projects. And so just to touch base on where staff are at with some of the strategic plan projects and how we're addressing what council has wanted to do over the next over these 4 years of their term, and then we'll be going in camera as part of community charter requirements for discussing staff and salary. So I'll hand it over to Ms. Monteith, and you can please ask questions as you go through this process. We're happy to answer anything as we go through the process, and if there's any questions anytime. Thank you.
Through the mayor, thank you and welcome. All of you actually went through this process last year, so we're going to do it again, but I'm probably just going to do it a little bit faster. But please do, if you have questions, ask them along the way. If we can just get the second slide. There we go. So that is a little hard to read on the screen, but there's a copy in your binder. It's the budget meeting schedule that you adopted at the last council meeting. So my part of the presentation today is meant to be a cursory overview of municipal budgeting. And over the next series of meetings, council is here to decide the 5-year financial plan for the District of Ucluelet with the guidance, recommendations, and support of staff. So my job as the CFO is to actually prepare the financial plan and corresponding bylaws for adoption as outlined by council. Next slide. Okay, so the 5-year financial plan right out of the community charter is Part 6, Division 1, and it does require that we prepare a 5-year financial plan annually, and it must set out the following for each year of the planning period. Oh, it's one of those. Okay, sorry. Didn't know it was going to do that. So the proposed expenditures by the municipality, the proposed funding sources, and the proposed transfers to or between the funds. And the total of the proposed expenditures and transfers to other funds for a year must not exceed the total of the proposed funding sources and transfers from other funds of the year. Next slide. So we want to just have some preliminary goals during the 2020 budget planning series. That might include maybe some preliminary approval of some of the operating and capital expenditures for key projects early in the year. We want to continue to refine the budgeting planning process. A lot of us are still fairly new here, 3 years and under. And we want to continue to engage public via the 4 special council meetings, and we have an open house planned in April, and we're also webcasting this meeting, which is great. All right, can you just, yeah, thank you. So fund accounting. So municipalities use fund accounting. So what this means is the focus is on how money is spent rather than how much is earned. And so within this system, you'd get a fund is a self-balancing set of accounts. And the emphasis is on accountability rather than making a profit. In the District of Ucluelet, we have the following funds. We have the general operating fund, the general capital fund, water operating fund, water capital fund, sewer operating fund, sewer capital fund, and then we have some statutory reserve funds, such as the direct cost charged by reserve fund. When we have a statutory reserve, we aren't allowed to draw down from it unless we get council approval. So the money is directed into the fund and we can't spend it unless we have your approval to do so because they're restricted. So as a municipality, we receive revenue from the following proposed funding sources. We get property tax, parcel taxes, we do some fees for service, other sources such as grants. We have a little bit of proceeds from borrowing, and then we have transfers to or between funds, whether it be revenue would be if we have money sitting in reserve and we want to transfer it into revenue to do a project that year. And of course, any accumulated surplus that we have. In 2019, it was approximately 8.3 million. I think it topped out at 8.5. So in our general fund, it was just over 5.8 million, and water and sewer was just over 2.5. Absolutely.
Through the mayor, so the reserve fund, is that something like the community forest money would go into there? Is that where that goes?
We don't have a statutory reserve fund for the community reserves. Right now it's sitting in a non-statutory fund. It's setting off to the side. There's $3 million in that fund. We would still need council approval to spend that money, but it's not in what's classified as a government statutory fund. So you can still restrict the funding, but we don't need the province to oversee that. Okay. Sure. Oh, there we go. Okay. And then expenditures. So you guys know this, you have this down pretty well. The total proposed expenditures and transfers to other funds for a year must not exceed the total of the proposed funding sources. So in other words, we have to present a balanced budget. The proposed expenditures must set out separately any interest and principal on municipal debts. Any capital purposes have to be separated out from operations. Any deficiencies occurring if you happen to overspend for the year has to be set aside and shown as an expense in the next year, and any other municipal purposes. Okay, so this was in 2019, this was our budget last year. So again, it was approximately 8.3 million. You will see on the left, so the left is revenue, and you will see a little over to the left at about 11 o'clock, you see 0%. So when we type in the dollar amounts, if it's a very small amount, it will register as a 0. So that would have been the community forest fund. And I just want to point out that we have received $3 million, but council's only earmarked $70,000 in 2019. So it sits in the bank account, and then we don't realize it as revenue until we're going to use it. And so with that, we have the offsetting expenditures to go with it. So 2020 will probably look quite different, but this is what it was last year. So on the left is our revenue, and on the right is our expenditures, and one is balanced with the other. Any questions about that slide? No. Okay. So how do we get there? We have to create a bylaw. Actually, we have to create 2 bylaws. I think it's 7. There we go. So one of the things that we have to do is set objectives, and these are the objectives that most municipalities go ahead and set for their 5-year plan, and they're also the ones that were approved last year. And we're just going to discuss them in more detail in the following slides. So if you can just go to the next one. It's quite lengthy. There you go. Oop. Okay, so we have a financial plan objective, and that's, you know, where we're going to look at taxation. We're going to look at, you know, fees and charges, looking at our fees and charges bylaw. How can we recoup some of our costs, not through tax dollars? Actively pursue revenue sources to minimize the tax. We're going to look at cost recovery policies for fee supportive service. Those kinds of things would be like our fire department. We have some service agreements to go out of area, and we do have small amounts coming in to recover the costs on those calls. But we have a new fire chief now, so he's going to review all of those contracts and see if they're up to date. They're quite old. General revenues, we don't use for specific services unless they're required by law. And we would look at developing and creating partnerships to reduce costs. So one of the things that came to mind today would be our land use study that we're sharing with Tofino. We're splitting the costs on that. So anytime we can work with another agency is a good thing. Okay, and then we have our surplus funds objective. So the community charter doesn't allow municipalities to plan for a deficit. So therefore, revenue projections should be conservative and expenditures are closely monitored. And you see that with the quarterly reports that I bring forward to council. The managers are doing it on a monthly basis and sometimes a weekly basis, depending on how busy we are in the year. So this type of objective, we would be looking at a very modest annual operating surplus. We're not here to have a big profit. We're here to balance the budget. You can have a modest surplus. So, where are you? Reserve fund. Oh, there we go. Trying to do everything one-handed. Yeah, reserve fund objectives. So that's what I was talking about earlier, is we have different reserve funds that we put money aside for future capital expenditures. They are going to, you know, fluctuate significantly from year to year depending on how things go. And it provides for working capital to ensure a more sufficient cash flow. And we look at them annually to make sure that we have enough reserve funds available. So when we talk about replacing aging infrastructure, for example, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is making sure that we set our reserve fund levels at a point where we can feel confident that we can replace some of this infrastructure without using new tax dollars. Tax allocation classes, we're going to talk more about in January and February meeting, but it is an objective of every 5-year financial plan and bylaw, and that has to do with how we spread out and apportion the taxes to each of the different property classes, whether it be, you know, residential, commercial, and in our case we have utility customers as well. We figure out our taxes based on the multipliers that council sets. But we will get into that in January and February once the taxation rolls come out. There's a new one that comes out in January, so we'll know where we're at then. I want to talk a little bit about the permissive tax exemptions, because we currently have 2 tax exemption bylaws in place. They don't expire for another couple of years or so, but it doesn't seem that the municipality has an actual policy on permissive tax exemptions. I can't find one, and we do need to do that. So that's something that I've identified for next year. And I took a look at Tofino's last week. And what a policy does is, you know, council can decide who qualifies. Some of them are statutory, like places of worship. But there's quite a few that could qualify if council sees fit, and you want to look at how much could we actually put aside, each year? So we really should have a policy on that.
Are we going to dig into a little bit of who actually right now is qualifying as a nonprofit?
Yeah, we can. At the next meeting, I can actually bring the bylaws with me if you'd like. I know that bylaw 1222 is the churches in town, and 1221 is a lot of the nonprofits.
I guess specifically, I'm thinking about the Seaview Senior Society. I know they pay property tax right now, and it'd be nice to see what that looks like.
That's correct. And so they currently are not part of the bylaw. I don't know if they've ever approached council before
No, they
or
haven't.
not, but
Not officially, and I think it would be nice
okay.
to be a little proactive on it.
yeah, and that's part of what creating a policy does. It sets out the guidelines for people approaching us. Do we want to do special invitation? Do we want to put out an ad, or do we want to just let people come to us? But it's really good to have a policy, and then you have your guidelines within the policy. So, for example, Tofino's also says, this, and this, but then it says, okay, but the maximum amount of permissive tax exemptions each year can't be more than 2% of the total municipal tax. So say if ours is $3 million, 2% of that would be $60,000. And then if the assessments come out and it's going to work out to more than that, there's a clause in their policy that says it will be prorated down to not to exceed. And that makes it easier for budgeting purposes for us. But I think we need to just work on having a policy so that we can follow it. And because you're right, there may be more people that qualify.
I'm not very aware of any other ones, but definitely the seniors one is something that stuck out for me there at their AGM.
Absolutely. So if we target that policy to come in by, say, July of 2020, everybody, we have to do our new permissive tax exemption bylaw by October 31st of each year. So if we targeted, say, July 2020 to have that policy in place, we could do a process and have first, second, and third reading on the new bylaw. For sure. Thank you. Oh, development cost charges bylaw. So that's when a developer comes into town, or any new lots that are created, they have to pay a development cost charge. And our current bylaw allows for certain amounts of money to be put in the different statutory reserve accounts. So water, sewer, and storm, and I believe parks. And then again, we're not allowed to spend that money unless we have council approval for a particular project, and it has to be used for new construction, not replacement of current assets. Okay. Oh, let's talk about funds. Reminds me of a song. So there's our seven funds. Sorry. It's hard to make accounting fun. Okay, so our general fund is, these would basically be our departments within our municipalities. So administration is largely corporate services. Protective services would also be our fire department. Transportation and public works. Small craft harbor, planning and development, which includes, in our case, bylaw enforcement. And then we have recreation and cultural services, which includes parks, and fiscal services is our finance department. Operating funds, we have the water and sewer funds, and each of those are everything to do with administering that particular program, our connections, our maintenance and distribution of both systems, and how we treat the treatment that we put into the water and sewer. Our capital funds are general capital, water capital, sewer capital, and again, the statutory reserve funds. What do I want to say about that? These funds are only to support capital projects. They're not to support any operational needs. We could pay, for example, the general capital fund could pay for land improvements or building a new park, upgrading roads, and so forth. And then the water and sewer capital funds would be for, well, obviously for capital projects within those programs. And then again, we don't realize the revenue until the corresponding expenses are incurred in that year. Next slide. Yeah, I guess that's it for me. So we've talked about, the type of accounting that a municipality does. It's called fund accounting. So we're not looking at the bottom dollar at the profit. We're looking at accountability and how we spend the money. We've talked about the capital funds, and we're open for questions.
Any questions yet? No, I think you're doing wonderful. You're keeping it simple for us.
Fantastic. I'll hand it back over to Mr. Boyson.
So I thought it was important in these early stages here to also highlight the strategic plan that was approved earlier this year by council. It's so far, I'm very pleased with having this plan. It's very helpful for staff to be able to prioritize and focus on what council wants to achieve over the next 4 years. And I just wanted to touch base on how we're on track for that. We're just completing first year, but so some of these, there's the 4 key pillars and then projects under each of those. So I pulled out the key projects that some of them have different phases over the years, but in 2020, these projects, which is almost everything, all the key deliverables from the strategic plan are kind of highlighted in this set of projects in front of you. So very quickly, the bylaw and policy updates. Right now, staff have been reviewing our policies and bylaws to just do the gap analysis. So what they're looking at is to just say, what's our current list, and what ones need to be updated, and what's the priority for those? Do they need to be done in 2020 or 2021? And then, or do we have also an opportunity for new policies to be implemented? So that's up to the department heads to be able to understand from their perspective and their operations and in their unique roles of planning or public works, that what sort of policies are you finding that you need, or bylaws that should be in place that we don't have. So there'll be a report that we're putting together. I mean, basically in January, we'll start to have that gap analysis done, and I'd like to bring that to council in likely it's going to be in February. By the time I'll be able to get a report together that summarizes where we're going to go. And it's just basically each department's going to be responsible for moving the items forward. So this is a very useful process for us. It's dusting off a lot of old documents and trying to clarify things, but it's one of those projects where it takes time, but we realize the benefit of us being able to be really clear about what we have in place and where our gaps are. So housing needs assessment is scheduled for 2020, and that's a priority project, obviously, as part of the affordable housing discussion for the community. We've initiated the project in partnership with Tofino for the land use demand study, and immediately after that is going to be the housing needs study. I think it's going to need that information from the land use study to inform that housing needs assessment. So, so number 2, community development and well-being. Health center project moved forward this year, and it's been going forward quite well with the consultants and the follow-up interviews after our initial engagement session that we had. So they've been speaking with VIHA and Island Health. Island Health has been helpful with giving us some more detailed information on original needs assessment that they came up with. Also talking with our local Euclid doctor's office as well. So they're working on a design right now, something to look at and just get that initial conversation going. So and then we'll build on that towards costing as well. Amphitrite lands, that's moving forward positively. We're waiting to get the final approval from the province that the funding is going to be moving forward, but we're optimistic that project will be able to get rolling. And Urban Systems, who's our consultant that some of you got to meet a little more last night at our open house, they're going to be able to do that project for us as well as a part of the contract. So they're going to be moving forward the Amphitrite Lands project. So that's one that you can expect to see some of the construction work and discussions going on in 2020 as well. So we're pretty excited about getting that one going. It's an exciting project. Harbor Master Plan is also going to be moving forward, and we're going to be doing that under the harbor funding from the harbor reserve funds that we have to be able to make that one happen. So Urban Systems is going to help us with that one as well. Question?
Just a quick question, sorry, Mark. With the Harbor Master Plan, obviously the 52 steps is a live conversation. Does DFO participate in the Harbor Master Plan, or is that just originates on us that submits it to them?
We'll be making sure that they're a part of the whole discussion all the way through, so they're a key part of the whole thing.
Okay.
And to be honest, we were originally told the DFO was going to be a major part of it and leading it for us with
Right.
us working with them. We do have to take the lead, but they will be hand in hand with the discussion. So as best we can, we'll be making them be a part of that. And 52 steps will be a huge part of that discussion. Yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if we could ask questions during the presentation.
Absolutely.
Just going back to the health center, I believe they were trying to schedule something in January, another meeting with us. Is that correct? With the consultants?
That's the hope. They're working on a design right now, and they're trying to come up with something for that meeting. So I think we want to see what they're going to have ready for that next meeting before we book the setup. So it might be February by the time we get it going, but I'm scheduled for an update tomorrow to find out from the consultants where we're at. Yeah. Yeah. Happy to take questions at any time. So number 3 was assets and infrastructure management. So our asset management program is moving forward. I'm going to speak a little bit about that on the next slide, so I'll hold off on that one for now. Peninsula Road corridor work is a priority project under this section, and that's was started to be addressed last night at the open house. We're very pleased with the attendance last night, actually, on a very stormy night after a lot of stuff going on in December, and we had a really good turnout and very good feedback just on the initial concepts and really introducing the whole concept of these projects to the community. Very interesting feedback already on where we're headed. So we'll be summarizing that for council and giving you
look forward to
updates
that.
on
It
that as we
looked
go
great.
forward. Yeah, so part of our consultants' work is to take that back and to summarize that for us and then share that with you afterwards. So,
Oh, Councillor McEwen?
yeah.
Is there a way to see what was presented last night? I didn't get back from the ACRD meeting until 7, so.
Yes. Yes. So the slides from that are going to be delivered to council as soon as I get them. I'm just waiting to get them today. They will be sent off to you. They're also going to be up on our website, on a regular posted website. So we've set up a website for these projects.
Oh, great.
So that the public will always be able to comment. They can always, we'll just leave it open-ended. We're just going to have updates there as we move forward in these projects and get more information. We'll build on the website. Yeah, sticky notes sticky notes and dots were a big part of that one, but they'll always be able, we'll be encouraging them to email at info@ucluelet.ca at any
Perfect.
time, and we'll be summarizing all that feedback. So, so far off to a good start. And lots of new ideas proposed in there about what designs could look on Peninsula Road, and there's a lot of things to consider, so we just want to make sure we have lots of conversation.
For sure.
Get the
Awesome.
right plan going. So, utility plan alignment. So we've been moving forward on looking at the different plans for the community. So there's we have a lot of plans on the go right now, but this one in particular, we're talking about a roads master plan, for example. Actually, it leads into us right now getting a proposal for a subdivision master plan, or a service master plan for subdivision services and also for larger developments across the community. How does the design of our roads, lighting systems, and sidewalks all look as we go forward with big projects? So that's happening right now, working primarily between planning and public works. So we're moving forward on that, and that'll include the whole DCC discussions, a part of that as well. So number 4, so alignment of strategic plans and collaboration model. So these were 2 things that were, I think, just based on council's interest in increasing collaboration across the region here on the West Coast. We do have a joint council meeting scheduled for January 20th, and there are some topics being put back and forth. I did an initial review of how our strategic plan aligned with the Tofino strategic plan, and one of the big topics was regional planning. I think that just there was quite a few things that can all fed into the topic of regional planning. So they include healthcare, developments and transit and all kinds of different things. So it was interesting to compare. And right now, Mr. Rottenberg is working with our colleagues over in Tofino to come up with a plan. So the agenda, hopefully we're going to narrow it down. There's a lot of, when we pull together
We
all
can meet
12
again, right?
counselors.
We don't can be a part two, so.
Yeah, so I think my suggestion was to have some 3 or 4 key topics
Yeah,
for
for sure.
the 2 councils to talk about, and so we'll be confirming those. But that's where we do have a chance to talk about the strategic plans, and not only is it the joint council meeting between the 2 councils, but also in the afternoon to have a West Coast discussion as well with all of the partners on the West Coast, so First Nations as well. Yes, yeah. And my feeling is that from that discussion will lead to a collaboration model. I feel like that's the opportunity then to talk about what is the future, and is it the collaboration model is regular joint council meetings, maybe it's twice a year, or is just even once a year when all the West Coast is so busy. I think at least once a year a collaboration model could be just having those joint council meetings, and maybe there's a committee of some kind for the West Coast beyond the West. There's a West Coast committee led by the ACRD. Is there something
And
more
I think
that's needed?
yeah, and I think sometimes I think that's the, maybe that's what's not meeting our expectations is the West Coast Committee going back to the Alberni Valley with the feedback rather than something that's really originating on the West Coast Peninsula here that actually stays here, rather than taking this great information and running to the Valley. I think that, so I'm really looking forward to the collaboration of the West Coast and really coming to something that's ground-based from the West Coast, and not expecting the ACRD to solve all the regional issues. That'd be great. Oops, sorry.
There are C2C funds available for communities that want to network with each other. At one of the workshops I went to at UBCM, I was encouraged to, even if we've accessed it once before, to access it again. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Great, thank you. I'll look into that. And so this is partially the CAO also acknowledging all the projects that the staff have planned for the next year as well as we go into the project discussions in January, February. We have a lot of projects that are ongoing and planned for 2020, but we've also, just touching on projects in general, when I met with each of you individually and received feedback about some ideas about what you'd like to see in the 2020 budget. Those discussions and those projects have been listed as a part of the departmental discussions in
Wonderful.
January. So we will be, all those will be included as a part of the conversation. So, and I know I didn't miss any, so they'll all be there. Any questions about the strategic plan approach and where we're headed?
No, and I think for all of us, it's nice that we do have something that's on paper that we all truly believe in. So I love that document, actually. It's always in my backpack. You got yours in your backpack? Yep. Okay.
Excellent. Okay. And as mentioned, I wanted to dive just a little bit deeper into asset management. It takes time to build up our asset management system. This is something I really do want to tackle. It's something that we are gradually working forward on. So one of the projects this year, for example, was to get that facilities assessment completed. We have the results of that facilities assessment, but to take the assessment data and instead of just sending it to council, we do have to review it and analyze it and assess it and give it a little more thought about the information. They're complex discussions, but also I want to make sure, so we have our inventories of these different assets that we own. We're getting to a point where we're feeling very comfortable about our inventories, generally about our condition assessments, but we're in that phase of getting some condition assessments still completed on all the different assets we have. And then also the programming and use analysis. So because looking at these things in isolation, it's all about how do we use these buildings? What does the community need? What's the desire of council as well to keep buildings? Because there's some numbers that are coming up about some of the facilities that are a significant amount of investments required. And is that the best way to put our dollars forward? So I just I provided this slide here very quickly sort of today for council because I felt it was important just to acknowledge that you know that this asset process is moving forward. So what I've said at the top of the slide there is that when we get to the March meetings, which I think we have a little more flexibility in our time, that's after we've completed the operational and project discussions hopefully, for the most part. We'll be able to wrap up any other project discussions or any other issues in that March meeting. But I'd also like to be able to provide a more detailed summary of assets and where we're at when it comes to all these different areas. Still, the level of detail will be hard. It takes years to really get a robust asset management system going. But when it comes to buildings, we'll absolutely be able to share that information with all the information that's in it. So the report is something we can provide to council. Absolutely, this is material. It's fine to share with you. I just would caution council about the material that's inside, because there's a lot of information in there, and these numbers can be. It's a very honest report about the state of our facilities.
So, Mark, Mr. Boyson, to summarize, we're going to be getting a sort of overview of it once you've had time to pick it apart a little bit by March, but in the meanwhile, we could have the rough stuff to look at?
Well, the report has been finalized, so it is something that you can. This is the report from the consultant. So, and I believe it should be at this point confidential, but the council can receive it. Just something that I think we'd want to be able to. There's a lot of discussions there about the future of the buildings, and I think we just want to make sure we have the proper discussion about all the ramifications about where we're headed. But we're happy to provide that to council.
The more time I have to chew on it, I would like, if sooner than later, if I could have a copy.
Be happy to do that. So just to go through just some of the pieces here too is just the buildings and facilities. That part we've moved forward on. Sewer and water systems. We have all of our assets are now into our asset management software that we received funding for last year, and we were able to put into the database. And our CFO has also been able to use that software as part of be able to calculate or be able to keep track of our assets financially as well. So it's part of our reporting process. So my big concern is just making sure we don't get software that just sits there. And we're trying to use it as best we can and integrate it into our operations. Fleet vehicles, we will have a discussion about fleet vehicles coming for you in January as well, just more detailed. Our fleet's not that big, but we already have we purchased some vehicles this year, council approved, and we've got some more proposed for you for 2020 as well. It basically down the road would be like, getting into prioritization, funding options, and implementation. Maybe some of the areas we might be able to go down a little bit more into certain buildings and facilities if we're comfortable with that. But overall, this does take a couple of years before we really get things rolling and be able to say funding is going to be something that we need to talk about setting aside funds for long-term asset management and being able to reinvest in these assets over the long haul. We always have grants and gas tax money and other funds that we always be optimizing, but a portion of the money always has to come from us as well. So, any questions about asset management? And just to touch on, I thought it was important to touch base on this, just to put it in council's mind about community forest fund planning and just an approach to do it. I talked with my CFO about this, and it's just very comfortable keeping things the way that it is. It's just that if there's any direction or something, any information that you'd like to share with staff about, potential discussions about where you'd like to go with community forest funds, please give us some notice ahead of time, because we'd like to talk about it with you and make sure we prepare if there's some options you'd like to consider. We'd just like to be able to give you time to explore that as we go through the budget process over the coming months. This is a table that I provided to you before as an in-camera discussion, but without any dollar values or anything to it. It's just this was the survey that we did previously, and some of the things that we've addressed already in that. So,
I think I like the list, and I think the only thing that's been missing is there's Rebecca Hurwitz has brought that up a few times. Maybe just adding a line item there regarding a community fund of some sort. Maybe make that as a add-on, and we can have a more dialogue about that.
So, would you like me to bring it back though for a discussion as?
Yeah, I
part
think
of,
it needs to come back as a discussion
in
for sure.
January or February.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Outside of that, I think that the list is very, yeah. Great.
I would say that it's ambitious yet. I think this is the list that just to make sure is there ways that we're addressing this in different options. That won't all be able to receive forest money, but
No, but
but some of it is just some of them. The timing is just to be able to have it allocated, and just that for council to feel comfortable it's going to the right location over the next few years. And we do have affordable housing issues potentially coming up for options for that down the road.
Yeah, sorry.
Under Historical Society, is that for a museum? There's nothing under the status of that.
Yeah, I didn't put anything specifically in there, whether it's however it is best to help them. So I don't think I've had specific, although we do now have that support letter from council for a museum. I didn't put that in there specifically, but that could be one option, absolutely.
Okay. Anything else on that list? Anybody? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Boyson. So just a breath?
No, just a breath, but I did want to say, because we're, talking about adding, making sure that we don't lose sight of a possible community fund with the CBT. Having went for them as the alternative to Victoria and being involved in the Canadian community funds, they had their, what's the word for when you get a conference? And just hearing the different stories from the different communities, ones that weren't as lucky as us to have that initial those initial funds to begin with, but even what people have done with less, and I just think we would be missing a huge opportunity to not make this the moment where we establish something and just, yeah.
Well, you're going to be able to see that sales pitch in January, so
I'll refine it for then.
you're going to be able to give in detail your 3 or 4 good points behind it.
I think there's one thing is that it's good for us to know that because we'll bring forward some discussion points about it from staff, just about there's pros and cons. I think there's some
There certainly
opportunities
is.
as well. Municipalities can do their own version of this as well. I think potentially one of the benefits of the community fund with an external group, though, is actually it would probably be more long lasting, or maybe it could be less easy to change potentially. Although I think everything's up to whoever's on council at the time. There's some
Exactly, yeah.
adjustments that can be made, but there's some ways that things can be done. It's just there's pros and cons to different ways of doing it, but at the same time, the district can also put money in and manage the interest and put it through projects. So I think it would be one of the big questions for us to make sure that how does it set up to have council approve those projects and those funds, and that was brought up by council at the meeting on Tuesday. So.
Right. Yeah. No, it's. Well, yeah, we'll get into it a little bit more for sure.
So unless council has any questions, we've completed the public portion of our presentations.
Yes, and I'll be interested to know if the slide that's coming on behind us with this, whether they're going to be visible on the camera, because I haven't really gone on YouTube to see how it turns out. How clear it does.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I didn't notice how. Can you go back to the last slide there, Joy?
I think it must be.
I think from the camera it probably is not clear
Okay.
to see that. I have a feeling I think it's that size font might be a challenge. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I guess that's on your phone.
Okay.
These results were published previously of not all the comments that are on there, but the results of the survey were published to the public.
Okay.
And we can make sure it's more visible and also part of an agenda package potentially. If
I'm
you'd
just
like,
more
for the
thinking
next
like as
one.
we go down this pigeonhole the next few months is if we do have some slides that might be informative to some of the public, they can actually see some of them, but it's fine.
Yeah, it can be a part of the websites and also on the open house as well. We can
Okay.
have a section on that if just
Just a new tool. We'll see how it
comfortable for
goes.
council, if council's comfortable with that. Otherwise, if there's not any other questions.
Any other
we're good.
business? Okay. And question period, I think we'll be at that. We'll go. And procedural motion to move in camera that the council meeting be closed to the public in order to address agenda items under section 91A and C of the community charter. Can we get a seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So we'll go in camera, take a little 2-minute, 5-minute recess, and we'll start again.